The year is 1994. A 28-year-old Roman Abramovich is anxiously preparing for a meeting that could possibly change his life. He has made a small fortune and a name for himself, but it's not enough for him. On a yacht somewhere in the Caribbean, he is meeting with Boris Berezovsky, a wealthy man who has influence with the Kremlin and ears of President Boris Yeltsin. Together, they come up with a bold plan to buy the state oil company Sibneft for pennies on the dollar. Over the next year, through a series of rigged auctions, Abramovich bought 90% of Sibneft for just $240 million. He paid only $18 million out of pocket. You might know Abramovich best for Chelsea, but his wealth wasn't made in the football fields of Europe. It was made in the chaotic and corrupt post-Soviet Russia, a time when it wasn't uncommon for businessmen to get assassinated over failed deals. He has shaped much of modern Russia and was in Vladimir Putin's inner circle for a long time. Some even call him Putin's favorite son. His story is terrifying and fascinating at the same time when you realize how humble his beginnings were. This is the story of Roman Abramovich and how he became one of the most influential Russian oligarchs. Although Roman Abramovich is one of the richest men on earth today, his start couldn't be any more humble. Like most oligarchs, he had the ambition, but he came from nowhere. Born to Jewish refugees in Russia in 1966, life was already hard, but he lost both his parents early. His mother died of a blood disorder when he was just 1, and his father died in a construction accident 3 years later. After this, he was forced to live in the harsh climate and nothingness of Siberia with his uncle. And for a while, it looked like his life wouldn't be anything spectacular. He wasn't a very good student and didn't have any noteworthy talents. He tried engineering in college, became a mechanic, and even joined the military for a while. He wasn't very successful anywhere. But he had one thing going for him from the start, an entrepreneurial mind that wasn't afraid of taking risks or breaking the law. His first business success was actually in the military. He stole gasoline from the army camps and sold it back at a seemingly discounted price. But he saw the risk and decided to score big one last time and leave. He stole an entire train cart filled with diesel and made a small fortune. But he didn't instantly become successful. Quite the opposite, actually. With the money he made, he started some legit businesses, and one of his first big success was selling toys and rubber ducks. He sold some illegal merchandise like perfumes and deodorants too, which was quite lucrative. It looked like he was getting away with everything, but soon his luck ran out and he was arrested for stealing the diesel train. However, by this time, Abramovich had already made some money, and this was 1991 when the Soviet Union was collapsing. So after a few weeks in jail, his records conveniently disappeared, and he was a free man again. This is where his true rise to the top truly starts. After making some good money selling rubber ducks, he was ready to take it to the next level. In 1992, at just 25 years old, he dipped his toes into trading and transporting oil, which was much more lucrative and scalable than selling rubber ducks. By 1994, Roman Abramovich had built a small fortune and a reputation for himself as a savvy oil trader. But he wanted something much bigger. Abramovich had seen how lucrative the oil industry was and wanted a bigger piece of the pie. This was also the time when Russia was privatizing its key industries. Privatizing was a good idea on paper, but in reality, it was a mess. The auctions for companies were rigged, officials were corrupted, and companies were sold for pennies on the dollar to insiders. Everything was orchestrated by a few insiders who were close to the Kremlin. Abramovich had a plan, but desperately needed an insider to back him. This is when he met Boris Berezovsky. Berezovsky had made his fortune by selling cars and automobiles. By 1994, he was one of the most influential people in the Kremlin and in the inner circle of President Boris Yeltsin. Abramovich had set his eyes on Sibneft. During this time, the Russian economy was in shambles and desperately needed to raise money. Boris Yeltsin, the president, was also becoming very unpopular, and a communist win in the next election looked like a real possibility. Over here, Abramovich was rich, but he had nowhere near what was needed for Sibneft. So like any aspiring hustler, he came up with a plan. Here was the idea. Berezovsky would use his influence to rig the auction for Sibneft and acquire the company for pennies on the dollar. Yeltsin would siphon off government funds to pay for the company, and Abramovich would run the company. Berezovsky would also open a new TV station to broadcast pro-Yeltsin propaganda, and it worked perfectly. The auction was completely rigged. Foreign investors who were willing to pay much more than Abramovich were discouraged to invest, sometimes going as far as abducting the representatives till the auction was over. Records show Abramovich receiving more than $140 million from government accounts. When everything was said and done, Abramovich put only $18 million out of pocket and acquired 90% of Sibneft for $240 million. The propaganda machine of Berezovsky worked perfectly, and Yeltsin won the 1996 election. Overnight, Abramovich became a billionaire and one of the most influential men in Russia. Abramovich had an informal agreement with Berezovsky, where Berezovsky didn't officially own any stakes in the company, but would receive 50% of profits informally. Berezovsky didn't think much of this, as he was riding high on his success and didn't think Abramovich could cross him. But this would later cause one of the biggest lawsuits of the century. The ultimate showdown between two oligarchs in a British court. But more about that in a minute. For now, both Abramovich and Berezovsky were getting obscenely rich and powerful. If Berezovsky's TV station ran your propaganda, you were guaranteed to win any election. But Boris Yeltsin was becoming very unpopular and seen as a puppet of the oligarchs. So the oligarchs, especially Berezovsky, wanted to pick a successor. They eventually decided on a former KGB agent, Vladimir Putin. By now, the oligarchs were looking untouchable, and everyone thought Putin could be controlled like Yeltsin. So once again, they pushed the propaganda machine and used their influence to win the 1999 election. Putin was playing smart and didn't give any hints that he could not be controlled. However, right after Putin got elected, he did a complete 180. He publicly announced he was going to take down oligarchs as a class. This was extremely popular among people, as they had seen oligarchs exploiting the corrupt system and getting rich while everyone else struggled. Putin called 27 of the most influential oligarchs in a room and gave them an ultimatum. You can keep your money and wealth, but stay out of politics and stay out of my way. Some billionaires could see the tide shifting and complied. Roman Abramovich was one of them. But others, like Boris Berezovsky, couldn't swallow this and started to openly oppose Putin. Berezovsky even used his TV station to push anti-Putin propaganda, but Putin wasn't playing around. He was a former KGB agent and knew how to play dirty. Investigations were opened on oligarchs who didn't comply, while people like Roman Abramovich were rewarded by giving them more favorable deals. In 2002, an arrest warrant was issued against Boris Berezovsky and he would flee to London. Abramovich, too, no longer had any use for him, so he agreed to give Berezovsky one final huge payment for Sibneft and no more. Later, records would reveal Abramovich paid him around $1.5 billion. Over the next few years, Abramovich continues to thrive under Putin's rule. He didn't meddle in politics, and Putin let him do whatever he wanted. He moved to London, and in June 2003, he came into the Western spotlight after his high-profile purchase of the football club Chelsea. Chelsea was close to bankruptcy when he bought it, but right after his purchase, Abramovich started pouring money into the club and made Chelsea one of the most successful clubs again. In 2005, Abramovich sold his stake in Sibneft for $13 billion. After a quiet few years, Roman Abramovich would come into the spotlight again. And this time, every aspect of his life would be scrutinized and put under the microscope in the British court. Remember Boris Berezovsky? The man who had helped Abramovich get rich from the Sibneft deal and fell from Putin's grace. Well, he was living in London in exile and continued his extravagant lifestyle. By 2012, he had lost most of his wealth due to a lot of reasons and decided to take a gamble. He sued Roman Abramovich for $5 billion, claiming he owned 50% of Sibneft, and Abramovich forced him to sell the stake for $1.5 billion. Abramovich's counter was simple. He never officially owned anything. He was hired as a consultant. The world had never seen such a case. Oligarchs are notorious for being secretive, especially about their wealth. But everything was in the spotlight here. Details about how Abramovich and Berezovsky made their wealth, how they had exploited a corrupted system. The media covered every aspect of it. The court eventually ruled in Abramovich's favor, but his secrets were now exposed to the world. He once again became the center of attention after the Russia-Ukraine war. The West has sanctioned him, citing how he is in Putin's inner circle. He tried setting up peace talks with Ukraine, but let's just say Putin didn't like it, and he was poisoned as a warning, showing that even oligarchs are not above him. So he is in a very tight spot here, but even after everything, he is one of the richest men on the planet. So what do you think about Roman Abramovich's story? Does he inspire you, or do you despise people like him? Comment that down below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.